Welcome to the American Indian and Alaska Native Behavioral Health webinar series. I'm Kate Trams, and today Shawn Bear is going to join me to present on storytelling, revitalizing the oral tradition for healing and connection. This training series is brought to you by the National American Indian and Alaska Native Addiction Technology Transfer Center. We are one of 4 national focus centers serving the ATTC network, which also includes 10 regional centers and a network coordinating office. To learn more about the ATTC network, please visit our website. Coming up in August, we'll have a session on Native American cultural sensitivity training led by Ed Parcells, the curriculum chair and master trainer of our South Dakota Native American curriculum for non-Native providers. For our Essential Substance Abuse Skills series, on July 15, Nazba Tom will present clinical evaluation screening. Our center is a Native certified educational provider, and we'd be happy to provide you with CEHs for a $15 fee. The request form is available for download in the Files pod in the webinar screen and will also be sent in a follow-up email to all who attended. Immediately following today's webinar, you'll be redirected to our GIPRA evaluation. This survey asks about your satisfaction with the event and takes less than 10 minutes to complete. We thank you in advance for helping us to improve our programs. You will be muted for the duration of this webinar, so please use the Q&A pod to share your questions and comments, and we will address questions at appropriate points during the presentation. If you prefer, you may view the presentation in full screen mode by clicking on the full screen button at the top right corner of the presentation pod, which looks like 4 arrows pointing outward. To return to the regular view, click the button again. We would also like you to be aware that this webinar records participant attention time. If you minimize the webinar or are working in another window, the system will record your participation as inactive, which may be reflected in the number of CEHs received. The opinions expressed in this presentation are those of the presenters and do not necessarily reflect the official position of CSAT or the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Today's webinar is presented by Shawn Bear and myself. Shawn is the Senior Behavioral Health Consultant here at the National American Indian and Alaska Native ATT, and he has worked for many years as a substance abuse counselor and is also working on his master's degree in mental health counseling at Drake University. He is a member of the Meskwaki tribe in Tama, and he is also an Army veteran. I'm Kate Trams, and I am a research support coordinator here and have worked here mostly doing marketing and design and logos and that kind of thing for the center, but I'm also working on the digital storytelling project, and so I'll be talking a little bit about that later. So we'll go ahead and pull up our presentation here. Today we are talking about storytelling, revitalizing the oral tradition for healing and connection. I thought I'd start with this quote, there isn't anyone you couldn't love once you've heard their story. This is a quote you may have, if you've heard this quote, it's possible you've heard it attributed to Mr. Rogers. This is something that he often said, and I think is just a really relevant idea to what we're going to talk about today. But we are going to start with Shawn talking about traditional storytelling and storytelling in Native culture, and then we're going to go on to discuss storytelling in the larger dominant pop culture and the danger of a single story, and then we'll tell you a little bit more about our storytelling project. So I'm going to hand things over to Shawn here, and we'll get started. Oh, I just have it open over here. Nope. You want to follow that?
Okay. Okay. Hello, my name is Shawn Bear. Let's see. Long ago, what happened is, and even sometimes today, still with many traditional people or Native American traditional medicine men or healers, what happens sometimes is when you ask them a question, they don't always give you the answer. what they'll do then is to tell you a story, which part of that story is kind of designed for you to also find the meaning within it yourself. Sometimes what happens is there are sometimes people that they're told to give them the answer, but there are also those that they're told not to give the answer because it's something that they need to learn how to do themselves. For instance, let's say that a person is on a fast or something like that, and what has happened outside in the fast, the whole thing, if they cannot see or hear the spiritual thing that's going on, what happens is nature speaks to them through stories. And it's up to them to learn how to decipher this message that nature is telling them. But a lot of times what happens is also they pass on things to help them remember better, because a story, it's like reading a book where you're able to see the story or be with it. Makes it more memorable, helps to preserve the essence of the story. For instance, some people, some tribes, what they'd have also is a person that is the storyteller. They hold all them stories. Long ago, they could have held a story to tell on to others. That helps them to cross the language barriers, for those who can interpret for them. But also, it's like if they're passing a message to somebody, they would be able to tell them what that message is instead of have it written down, which others could read. Also, with this, it's like when people are taught these stories, they're able to know many of the hidden meanings themselves and have the teachings about this, the history, what it does for the people as well. As we all know, that many of the stories were passed down from generation to generation, especially those who were taught the stories, because what the part of it is because like in different ceremonies, different healings and stuff like that, the story has to be the same every time because of what the story means, and they didn't want that to be miscommunicated. So there were actual people who were taught the stories, like a student. They would understand them more and be able to tell what they mean to others and know exactly what story would go where. It's just like with if you ever able to go to a medicine man or healer, some of these elders, what they'll do is tell you a story that is reflected to you, and it's kind of like individual to what you have to learn in your life. If you look at this, I've always liked this because the way that I have learned is that our ancestors knew there was a power in words. They knew also that there was a power in these stories because those are words within this story. And it's like long ago, like how people would be able to say a certain thing and it would happen. In a sense, it's like they're kind of like creating it, but bringing this power, this healing forth to what's going on at the event, whether it be a healing, whether it be a ceremony of some kind, things like that. Remember, it's like I've read some places they said that storytelling used to be used, but the truth is that storytelling is still being used in ceremonies, again, like I had said, healings by traditional medicine people, either by traditional people, spiritual people, by elders, by still those who are considered storytellers within their tribes, and those who have been taught the stories, because some of the importance is to know what this story really means and what it's about. It's just like with medicine people, somebody who they might be teaching. Many of those teachings are told them in stories. Here's something interesting: is that even like many Indian names, it's really a story. It describes that person. It describes that person's life and what it's for. It can be for protection. It can be to help guide them. It could also bestow upon them some kind of power. It creates kind of things in their life. It describes their inner being and the journey that person is on their life. In some tribes, it's like some people give the name by maybe others who've had that name. But also what happens as well is there are those who they go to medicine men, healers and stuff like that, and they pray about it. I mean, many people, even in those who are given, those who have already had that name, it's like many people fast. They pray about that, and this name comes forth, and they're able to give that name because that's the name that will help that person in their life. And the thing about Indian names is sometimes the Indian name may carry them throughout their whole lifetime. But sometimes also somebody may need more than one Indian name. The storytelling, it allows someone to come to their own understanding, which gives themselves a deeper meaning within their life and their self, the world around them. Allows the person to gain the healing and inner knowledge for oneself. That way it's earned. By giving a person the answers all the time, it can actually deprive the person of gaining the skills in learning how to process information, how to interpret those events, and how to attain that wisdom and hidden knowledge later in life. It's kind of like going to school and learning how that this story tells an inner meaning. And sometimes even like a certain word can also mean other things. So in some ways, sometimes even like a dream, different things, it's like different things pop up. It may not mean the same exact thing for everyone, but there are certain knowledges as one goes on that even a tree can represent more than one thing. It doesn't always represent a tree. So it's kind of like how people might call it a parable. This is kind of interesting here, and this is kind of the way that I've been kind of taught about it, is that giving someone the answer all the time, it can be seen as a hindrance to that person. It's just like being given the answers to a question without teaching the person how to attain the answer for themselves. And this is one that medicine man, this bottom one, had always said to me before, is because if you build a fire for a man, he'll be warm for a day, but to teach the man to build a fire, you keep him warm for life. It kind of comes from another saying that it's like to build a fire for the man, you keep him warm for a day, but to start the man on fire, you keep him warm for life, for the rest of his life. Has to do with the inner meaning within that person. But this one here is more like teaching them how to do something so that they can go on and do it for themselves.
Thank you so much, Shawn. So here I wanted to start talking a little bit about the ways stories have changed throughout history a little bit, and how stories are used now, especially in the dominant culture. And then we'll talk a little bit more later about the importance of minority cultures sharing their stories and being the ones to tell their own stories. But I've got here an image from the Caves of Lascaux, just kind of giving us a visual image of one of the earliest versions of visual storytelling that has been used in history. And then in just thinking about that, it reminds me a lot of how all cultures started with an oral tradition, and we all come from that same place where the stories of who we are were initially told, and they weren't written down. It was before we had language. That's a part of humanity. It's a part of all of us, and that is something that we can all connect to, and that's something that's familiar to all of us. So I've got a few advertisements here because I just wanted to show how storytelling is used now for a variety of reasons, and one of the ways we are bombarded with stories in popular culture now is by advertising. Advertising creates stories in order to connect with something that you feel in your life, and they want to connect that piece of something that you enjoy about life, and they want that to be like a direct connection with their product. And so Coke is a really good example of a brand that has done that for decades now, and they have taken whether it's a worldview or something that is shared by the dominant culture. They've taken that idea and somehow emblazoned their brand of Coca-Cola on this worldview that many people share, and because they want to be a part of that, and they want you, when they like this campaign, when they started putting people's names on Coke bottles and talking about sharing a Coke with a friend, they want their brand to be a part of that interaction that you have with your friends that happens daily, and they want to connect with that. And so it's a really interesting dichotomy that's happening with that. It can feel really manipulating, and it certainly is, because their end goal is to try to make money. Their end goal is not about you having a great time with your friends or connecting with your friends. That might be something they talk about in their advertising, but it's not their end goal. Their end goal is to make money. And so there's a little bit of something that's a little uncomfortable when we think about this kind of storytelling, when we feel like we're being manipulated, I think that's something that we should struggle with and should question all the time. Here's another campaign which I have been kind of watching over the last 5 or so years. I think the Dove campaign, they have called this the Campaign for Real Beauty, and they started with showing a lot of bodies that we don't normally see in popular culture, and in especially like magazine ads and those kind of things. They started showing women who are not professional models, and we're going with this idea that wanting to show that beauty is not one particular look and one particular thing, which is a really the whole idea is like very warm and heartening to see, but at the same time, like, they are still, that's the game that they are playing, is to try to connect with something in you that wants to see that they're doing good, that they care about you, and they're really trying to send this message that they're not just out there for the models on the runways of New York, but they're there for every person. And there's definitely some good and bad, I guess, that comes along with those kinds of messages. I have two ads here now that I just thought were really interesting when we start to see what is actually, like, the amount of effort that is put into creating a story, even to tell something really simple. So if you look at this ad, and if you read the little caption there, "Don't let yellow run out when you need it the most," you can get the idea that, okay, this is talking about an ink cartridge on your printer. So I just found this really interesting. This entire drama is created just to connect with that moment that many of us have when we've printed something and it comes out and we realize, oh, like, by the time the end of the page comes, like, my ink is all gone. And so, yeah, it's this entire story of beekeepers and, oh no, like, what would happen if you were caught naked, like in a hive of bees. So it's, marketers work really hard to create a story that's going to catch your attention. It's going to connect with something in you. And even I thought this was a little bit comical how much drama is created just out of this, to connect with this idea of printing something and realizing you ran out of ink. Here's another one from the same campaign of a bunch of women at a wedding running to grab the bouquet, and by the end, many of them are scantily clad or without dress. So, yeah, trying to connect that terror of being in not only a public event but a very formal occasion and being caught naked or something, trying to connect that terror or feeling with that same idea of running out of ink is a little comical to me. Here are a couple of ads which are telling a story all the same. They're using storytelling here to do good. This is UNICEF put these out, and these ads were created to help stop cyberbullying. And so both of these images show stories of the kind of horrors you may remember or you may have witnessed when you were an adolescent or in school, and the ways that that people can tease and bully in ways that are profoundly influential on how someone feels about themselves. So these campaigns are actually addressing issues that, and they use some of the language about bullying, that it can lead to even to suicide, to really reiterate how powerful bullying can be. So this study actually, I think we'll take a minute and have you watch a video here, because I want to use this as an illustration. So maybe able to click right on the slide. So we're just going to take a couple minutes. This video is actually just a minute and 20 seconds long. So you can click on that link. There also, if you're not able to click on the link in the slide, if you go down to the web links pod in the that will direct you to that video on YouTube. So I'll give you a couple minutes to watch that video on YouTube, and then you'll have to click back into the webinar screen to join us again. So I'll just, it's 12:24 here in Central Time, so at 12:26 I'll get started again. Okay, hopefully many of you were able to watch that video. Someone mentioned that their agency has blocked YouTube, so I'll just describe a moment. So, and yeah, and if you weren't able to watch it, if you think it'd be helpful to watch it later at a different computer, I hope that will work for people. But so this video, it's basically like the image on the slide. There's a few different shapes that kind of move around the screen, and they move around in ways they kind of interact with each other. And so what Heider and Simmel found in this study is that people created an entire narrative about just these shapes moving around. Some people, people gave these shapes very human characteristics. The larger triangle, it sort of moves more quickly and runs into the other shapes. So people talked about that being aggressive and angry, or frustrated and annoyed. And then they described the circle as having, empathy and but it just is a really good example of how story is so ingrained in us that we create it in a really simple illustration like that. So storytelling connects us to each other in ways that we often don't expect. Here, Rudyard Kipling is quoted as saying, "If history were in the form of stories, it would never be forgotten." This is something I've thought a lot about recently, and now that I have gone through some of our training on Native American history and learning a Native rather than the dominant white historian who I learned from in school. It really gives a very different of what I've learned, and I actually thinking about one of the most memorable experiences in learning history for me was in 6th grade. My class had Arithmetic, which is a book about World War II. And what's interesting to me about looking on that and how much that book impacted me, I remember the feeling reading that book and just feeling sick and being shocked that this is something that people did to each other, that the things that happened in this concentration camp were not only things that people did to each other, but it wasn't long ago. And it really struck me now looking back on that, how much that shocked me at the time, because I know I had learned about very similar types of stories about racial genocide kind of things in history prior to 6th grade. I know that was part of my education, but there was something about reading the story and hearing the person who lived it that really made it life-changing for me in a way that it will be memorable forever. And I think that this idea is very, very true. So I'm interested if people would like to, I'd love to see people write into the Q&A pod. If you have ever heard or read a story that dramatically changed something about the way you viewed the world, if you have any memories like that stick out, of stories that really brought home something new to you about the way people interact with each other, or just how made you view the world differently. I'd love to see some comments. So I think I'll keep going, but please submit those, and then if I see some coming in, I'll make sure to take a minute to point those out. So stories inform how we feel about others. There was actually a study that is referenced here in this article by Del Strati, and I'll have all the references at the end of the presentation, but he wrote about this study where they found that reading fiction significantly increased empathy towards others, especially people the readers initially perceived as outsiders. So that of other races, skin color, and that was really interesting to me, that the effect was even more profound when reading a story about someone who came from a different background. And in this study, they actually tested this by, while pencils were reading a story, the facilitator went around and would like accidentally drop a of pencils or pencils, and the people who had reported being most engrossed in the stories that they were reading were the most likely, or almost twice as likely as others, to stop what they were doing. Can really create empathy where it hadn't already existed. So the writer in this article, storytelling, especially a novel, allows us to peek into someone's emotions and see how other people think. This can affirm our own beliefs and perceptions, but more often it challenges them. So Emily shares an experience that I'll pass on now. She says, in mental health therapy, when you see a case on paper, it can appear heavy or intense. Then when you sit with a person in real life and you hear their story with detailed tone, body language, and it says, reading the stories about the Crusades in the Middle Ages while studying English in college caused me to do research about the outcomes of those conflicts. Church sanctions subject, first of all. Secondly, that there were such widespread massacre and atrocities. I use this of Freddie the Leaf by John Bear with all ages, and I use the story of Barrington Bunny to share the idea of giving yourself, loving one another, etc. And the story of the Velveteen Rabbit for self-esteem and shedding pretense. Excuse me. I often use these in my chaplain service or in mental health spirituality groups. Thank you, and I'll make sure. Let me just. Great. Like bearing an story inside of you. And if I think we're going to start talking a little bit about race and culture and minority cultures in a little bit, but I have to think this probably particularly where you came. So storytelling, journaling, and logging and other forms of writing have been used in therapy for many years. group sharing and storytelling in programs like AA, and I'm sure many of you use this in various forms in your work with clients. New studies suggest that writing about stresses and traumas may actually have positive physical effects. Sorry that I've got a little bit of a tickle in my throat. So this study that I'm referencing here is actually was done with patients who were in hospitals and not necessarily in therapy, but they worked with patients who were dealing with physical either disease or difficulties, and by writing about stresses and traumas in their life, their health was improving. And I find that really interesting, and I guess I would speculate that part of that has to do with if you're writing about your stress and that helps reduce your stress, then your body is not experiencing those negative effects that ongoing stress has on your body. So it can actually let your body heal and your immune system do the work that it's meant to do. That's just my speculation, but I am curious. I'd be curious to see a study like this done in substance abuse and other therapies. So stories help us to find meaning, and the act of writing or telling our story help us make sense of what has happened and what our choices have brought about. Our stories help to define ourselves both by connecting with things in other stories and framing our own, and they give us an idea to move forward with. What do we want to be now, and is it different than what we had thought? And now I'd love to have, if people are able to, watch a video here that's on, if you go to this link, this video is the start of a TED Talk, the link is actually through NPR because they do a program where they share some of these stories on the radio. So this link will take you to that page, and then if you're able to just watch for the first 3 minutes of this video. And again, the link, if you can click it on you can either click it on the PowerPoint or you can click it in the web links pod by clicking the danger of a single story and then clicking the browse to button. So we'll give you like until 44. I'll get started again at 44. So take a few moments and just watch the beginning of that video. Okay, hopefully many of you were able to watch that video. If you weren't, I'll just briefly describe. Adichie in her TED Talk is discussing, she is a writer. Growing up in Nigeria, the books that she had to read were all American and British books. So she describes the things that sort of the trappings of life around her didn't match the things she read in books. So then when she started writing stories, they matched the things that she read about in American books, and that because those were the only ways that she had ever heard stories, and so she's talking here about needing to have those stories that reflect a different experience, and so that's one of the things that with our storytelling project we want to put an emphasis on sharing the stories of Native people and Native people putting their own voices out instead of letting others tell their stories for them. So how do we own our own stories? Telling our own stories makes them true in the sense that you're claiming it and putting it into reality. Adichie also says that if we want to understand something or someone, we have to understand more than one thing about them. We can't think that we know someone when we only know one thing. I encourage you all to both watch the rest of her TED Talk if you have a chance later, but then also if you to the TED Radio Hour where she's interviewed, she has a really great conversation about some of those things too. So I would definitely encourage you to look at that if that interests you. So along the lines, the people were talking about in 2009 this possible Obama effect. A couple of studies, which I tried to find if there were follow-ups to these. I know it's been talked a lot about in education since then. Then they talked about even just a study where test scores were taken comparing black and white students. And before Barack Obama was elected, the black students did about 18% poorer on this test than white students. And then after he was elected, the results of the tests were basically even across the racial lines. And so I couldn't find evidence that this has now been backed up with further evidence, but it's definitely something I hear talked about in education all the time, that people talk about reminding students that that we have a black president and how that changes maybe how they think about themselves and their own abilities, and that can give them the confidence to trust what they know and to trust that they are capable of doing anything that the dominant culture can. So this is another quote from Adichie in her interview on the TED Radio Hour. Stories have been used to dispossess line, but stories can also be used to empower and to humanize. Stories can break the dignity of a people, but stories can also be used to repair that broken dignity. So I have another question for you. Can you think of a time you heard or read a story about someone whom you thought was fundamentally different from you? And in hearing their story, it made you realize that there was something surprising that you shared. In what ways did you realize that you weren't as different as you had thought? So think about that and comment, and we'll keep going and we'll share those comments as they come in. So the storytelling project that we are doing at the National American Indian and Alaska Native and we started a blog in which we wanted to share stories of recovery. And initially we wanted to do only stories of adolescents in recovery, and now I think we're expanding that because we want more Native stories and Native voices and stories of recovery from those voices, and so we are expanding that, but we also want to encourage stories of adolescents as well. That's a very important demographic for us, and so we would love to encourage all of you, if you either if you are a Native person and you have a story of recovery, we'd be interested to work with you, and also if you have clients, we both want to encourage you to be a part of this project, but also just to think of ways that you can use storytelling in your work with your clients. So I included on these slides an interview guide that was developed by Kelly Rembolt last summer as a part of preparing for the storytelling project. She worked with Shawn Bear actually on this, and so the following few slides are an interview guide that they developed to help someone talk about their recovery specifically. So if someone doesn't maybe know where to start with writing their story or telling their story, these are some good questions that can help get that going and to spark that. So Stephanie has a comment here. She is Standing Rock Sioux and works in mental health in South Dakota. And she also works with children and adolescents. Stories are very important to help kids be able to comprehend subject matter that is relevant to specific issues. Thank you so much, Stephanie. And I'll also just comment that we did another webinar last December on using story as a way to creative story and play with children. Resource to talk about using story with small children. So thanks so much, Stephanie. And then I have some resources here to people that we have worked with both. We've been a part of Samson's Recovery Month, doing our storytelling project. We linked to that. The Center for Digital Storytelling, we've actually attended some of their webinars, and they are a great resource if you are looking for more ways of creating stories, and they hold workshops where they actually have participants in a course of a couple days create a digital story, and they do a really beautiful job. So if you haven't heard of them, I would definitely check out their website. And then also the We Need Diverse Books campaign. I thought I would put that on there because it's a really great campaign, and it just shows much of a need for stories outside of the dominant culture there is. So I have another comment from Susan. I've always thought that hearing other stories, especially when working with clients in recovery, is the great equalizer and connector. That shared experience or sense of it seems to be healing, and thanks for affirming that. Oh, thank you, Susan. So then I've just got our references here, and then Shawn actually has a story to tell, and then we thought we would give people an opportunity to respond to story, and so feel free to comment, but also if you have questions for us, feel free to submit those at this time, and we'll take comments for those. I'm going to have Shawn tell this story in a minute.
Okay. this story was actually put into the movie Apocalypto. It's called The Hole in the Man. A man sat alone, drenched deep in sadness, and all the animals drew near him and said, "We do not like to see you so sad. Ask us for whatever you wish, and you shall have it." The man said, "I want to have good sight." The vulture replied, "You shall have mine." The man said, "I want to be strong." The jaguar said, "You shall be strong like me." Then the man said, "I long to know the secret of the earth." The serpent replied, "I will show them to you." So it went with all the animals. And when the man had all that he could give, he left. That they could give, he left. Then the owl said, the deer said, "The man has all that he needs. Now his sadness will stop." But the owl replied, "No, I saw a hole in the man, deep like a hunger he will never fill. It is what makes him sad and what makes him want. He will go on taking and taking until one day the world will say, 'I am no more, and I have nothing left to give.'"
Thanks, Shawn. Yeah, I'd be curious if people have a response to that. I'm sure that connects with people in different ways, so it'd be interesting to see some comments. Yeah, we welcome your questions as well. So feel free to submit those. We have a few minutes left. I'll just remind everyone while we're waiting for comments and questions that we do have a survey that we would love people to take. You should be redirected want to remind people of our upcoming webinars. If you aren't on our email listserv, let me know and I can make sure you're added to that if you would like to be added, and that will make sure that you find out about all of our upcoming programs. We have a comment here from William. "I'm reading a book by Joseph Marshall III called The Lakota Way. He tells lengthy stories about the fundamental values of the Sioux Nation. The stories are great, but too long. I want to use stories in my clinical work. Can you recommend a book with a good collection of shorter stories that I can use with my Lakota patients?" Shawn, do you have any ideas about that?
Some of the quotes might help. They have Lakota quotes, I do know. But I mean, it just depends on what you're going to teach. I'm not sure about if there's a book, but I do know that there are quotes that are written, and many of these quotes have so much meaning in them that it can help many people. But the thing is, the best thing to do is to find each story that'll help in many different ways. It's because it's like every situation is going to be different, and exactly what this person needs to learn. I think it can be very helpful in with youth or adults, because you can't always give them the answer anyway. But sometimes stories help them to get an insight in how to look about this and how to reach that conclusion for themselves.
Where do you usually find quotes, Shawn?
There are Native American sites online that'll actually have quotes from many different tribes.
Great, thank you. And Shanoa is sharing, there's a really good book called The Tiny Warrior, so thank you for sharing that. All right. Okay, Oh, she's got another little comment here about that. It's super heartwarming. Not sure which tribe it comes from, but it's a narrative story, sort of a biography, but includes a lot of lessons and shorter chapters. And it's written by DJ Eagle Bear Vanas. Thank you so much for sharing. And then we have someone's asking, William, where you're from. There are many resources available at different native crafts and art stores. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Stephanie. Yeah, I hope this was helpful. I hope people are interested in sharing stories and continue to find ways of putting more stories out that share, especially the Native voices. So thanks so much for joining us. Shawn, did you have anything